The poet Mary Oliver asked a great question. What do you want to do with your one wild and precious life? Are you looking to do something meaningful with your life? Is there a small, still voice within that keeps getting your attention? How do you know what God is saying to you? Everyone has a story about how they knew they were being called to live religious life. Listen to these stories that describe how some Dominican sisters of peace came to know they had a vocation.
How did I first become a sister? I started going on retreat at the Dominican retreat house in McLean, Virginia. I really enjoyed the retreat, but I didn't think anything really of it significant at that point. But I went back the next year, and then the sisters invited me to start volunteering to help promote the retreats. And I began to realize that I was happier when I was actually helping out on the retreats, going to the retreat house, interacting with the sisters, than I was in my everyday life working and living with a number of roommates. It became increasingly clear that God was calling me to something. So I began going to spiritual direction with my local pastor, really to look at deep within where God was calling me, what it was God was calling me to.
I became a sister through a bet. My dad told me if I wrote to Sister Mariotho, is the one who contacted me, if I wrote to Sister Mariotho, then he would stop smoking. And I said for sure I would win this bet. Lo and behold, he did stop smoking, and so I wrote to Sister, and our relationship continued till this day. In the Vietnamese culture, parents are always encouraging their children to go into religious life or the priesthood. For my dad, it was, I think, a sense of thanking God for their life. They escaped from Vietnam, and so it's to give back to God what God has given them, a new life here in America. So I think that's part of his wish. I really didn't want to be a part of it, but God calls everybody in a different way, and so that's how God tapped me in my shoulders.
I didn't really decide to become a sister. I wanted to get married, I wanted to have a family, but in high school I kept having this gnawing idea and this gnawing thought that maybe I better try it out. And then once I tried it out, I could say, okay, it's not for me, and I would just go home. Well, it didn't work that way. So probably about the time that I'd make finals, I decided that this was the path that God called me to, and I became a sister. I think in the beginning, it was a bit scary to me, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I love children too much. I'm happiest when I'm around children. Then I went into education, and I thought, okay, well, I'll have a lot of children. So I became convinced that I could be happy and that this would be the path that God asked me to take.
It is not always simple to recognize God's way of touching our lives. It usually takes time to figure out, to test, and to see if what you're experiencing really is a word from God.
I didn't think I would stay. I said, okay, I'll give it a year, and that is it. God can only have a year. And then I loved it. I saw the joy, the care that they give to one another. And so I said, this is somewhere I could be.
The thing I enjoy most about being a Dominican sister is our communal prayer and study together. It is the communal prayer that gives me the support that I need. And it's the study with other sisters that also keeps us intellectually alive.
Discernment is really about making a decision and allowing God to be part of that decision. It's about knowing yourself or learning to know yourself, but it's also about that relationship with God. And through those two things, you pay attention to your passions. You pay attention to what interests you. And you also have a spiritual director. And so you bring that dialogue with God, you bring things to prayer. well, maybe the possibilities for my life could include doing X, Y, and Z, but it also could include doing X, Y, and Z and being a sister while I do that. Because sisters don't just do one certain thing. They can do a variety of things, but they bring another dimension to it. I want people to find out more about themselves. And whether or not it culminates in religious life, that's not the end goal. The end goal is to help people to figure out a moment or a place of peace for them.
When I was in my mid-teens, quite frankly, I fell in love with God. And as time went on, when I got into college, I started thinking about what did that mean for me and how might I best live out that love commitment. And it just struck me that probably living life as a vowed woman religious would be the way for me. As time went on, it became very clear that that's the lifestyle I was attracted to. And so as a senior in college, I made that decision. I wanted it to be as a preacher of God's word in some way. I didn't know how, but so at that moment, it became clear to me that if I in fact had a call to religious life, it had to be Dominican, because that's really who I already was.
Part of discernment is to discover the truth within ourselves and how our truth fits into the world around us.
I think it is very challenging to discern the truth, especially in the age we're living in right now, where there's a whole question around truth and what is truth, and we can make up truth. So I think we're very much needed to try to help people to ask questions, be critical thinkers, speak from where their value system is coming from, and also to keep studying so they really understand issues.
Discovering the truth within yourself is made easier with the help of trusted friends and wise people who can ask you the right questions.
When I was in discernment before becoming a candidate, one of the first people I told I thought I might have a vocation was Sister Agnes, who is a Dominican Sister of Peace. I had done retreats with her in the past, so I called her. And I kept telling myself, you're a scientist. You need to make an informed, evidence-based decision. You should start visiting other orders. And I couldn't bring myself to, because every time I went into any of the Dominican Sisters of Peace mother houses, I felt at home. I was so aware of the love and the joy, and frankly, the intellectual level of a lot of the conversation. It's not a coincidence that part of Dominican life is study. All of that really prevented me from being interested in visiting any other order. I just felt at home. For me, there's a sense of belonging. There's an extraordinary sense of welcome. I feel welcomed by these women. I feel a connection to them. And I suppose at some level I feel a common sense of purpose, a common language, not just in prayer, but just in life and outlook.
I am very privileged to be in vocation ministry, and vocation ministry is what my dad likes to refer to as recruitment. He thinks I'm in recruits. As a vocation minister, I work with women who are discerning God's call in their life, who are trying to get in touch with what it is that God is calling them to do with their lives, to do with their gifts, who they are, their entire selves, and to walk with these women as they discern this. They ask questions about who they are as a woman of prayer, who they are as a woman of study. Are they able to live in community? Do they feel called to give their entire life to God in ministry and as a Dominican sister, or are they called to perhaps volunteer ministry or a short-term, full-time volunteer ministry? What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And that's really what was stirring up within me. What did I really want to do with my life that would be significant?
What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? For more information about the Dominican Sisters of Peace, contact us.